When you are the parent of a child with special needs, and that can be a very broad, encompassing category, but in my case, it's parents who have kids with ADHD or autism, or frequently both, there is a lot that goes on for you emotionally. There are a lot of psychological consequences of that can include loneliness, poor self-esteem. And so I start our process with an intake that's just about listening to the parent's story, and then we get to the child's story.
Hello, and welcome to our next episode of How Are You Really podcast. This is our episode number 10, Parent Power Up, Your Wellness Recharge. I am your host, Dr. Faryal Mallick. I am a child and adolescent and adult psychiatrist, and I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Norrine Russell. Dr. Norrine Russell is the founder of Russell Coaching for Students, which uses an innovative method of coaching for complex students, including those who are 2E, have ADHD, autism, or anxiety, and those with learning differences. This innovative method, connected coaching, has proven successful for thousands of students since being developed by Russell Coaching in 2009. With 20 years of experience creating positive youth development and parenting education programs, Dr. Russell has extensive knowledge of child development, learning styles, special needs, and positive parenting philosophies. She blends this knowledge to provide students and parents with comprehensive support and the tools they need to grow and thrive. Dr. Russell is the host of the ADHD, Autism, and Anxiety Breaking Out of the Box podcast. She is also the author of Asking the Right Questions Before, During, and After Your Child's ADHD Diagnosis. Dr. Russell has a PhD from Bowling Green State University with a focus on psychology and education. She consults with and trains at both public and private schools across the United States. She has taught psychology and education courses at a number of different colleges. Welcome, Dr. Russell.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I am so excited. I am honored that you're here. Thank you so much for taking out the time. So I am going to jump right into it. Firstly, I want to know how you ended up in this realm of psychology, like the ADHD, autism, anxiety portion of it.
Well, it wasn't the plan. I can tell you that. So when I was in graduate school, my focus was on developmental psychology and how different academic experiences helped young women to develop voice. And in general, my academic background is in developmental psychology, which some of your listeners may be familiar with, is the study of healthy development. What do people need to grow socially, emotionally, cognitively, morally? And when I finished graduate school, I was an academic for several years. And then I switched into applied work and worked in the nonprofit arena for several years, and then became a mom and started doing some consulting. Mm-hmm. And really with no plan, and I'm sharing this freely because I think there are people out there who are going to relate to it, started doing some coaching at the request of some of our local psychiatrists and psychologists here in the Tampa Bay area where you and I both are. And 16 years later, I am running Russell Coaching, which is a student coaching practice for kids who are atypical, have ADHD, autism, giftedness, anxiety, and we are the largest student coaching practice in the country.
Yeah, and I'm all for it. I've sent people over. Hopefully they join the program. I think that it's just so unique and so needed. And I'm so grateful that you ended up in this realm because we need it and there's not much out there. So we're going to be talking about parents and their wellness. So let's get right into it. What is parent wellness? What does that mean?
I think it's important as we have this conversation today that we really think about wellness from a holistic point of view. It's so easy for any of us to get caught up in one part of our wellness, right? Oh, my physical wellness. Am I exercising? Am I eating right? Is my weight good, right? There are a lot of people who are focused on that. Then there are a lot of people who are focused on their emotional wellness. Do I see my therapist regularly? Am I setting good boundaries? Are my relationships good? Then there are people who are very focused on financial wellness. But I think part of what's really challenging in today's world that is so fast paced is to make sure that we're slowing down and paying attention to all the areas of wellness. And I'm not saying this to impose more expectations, right? But if we take a look at all the areas of life, social, emotional, financial, professional, leisure, I think we would find that in general, we are doing a good job at taking care of ourselves. We tend to put a lot of focus into the area where we don't feel so good about ourselves or the area that's most important. But when I think about wellness, I really like to think of, 6 or 8 core areas of our life that are important to us. And then, of course, for any individual person, there are a few of those that rise to the top.
Yeah. So I heard physical, emotional, financial. I'm curious to hear about what other areas, because I didn't even think about, I always think about physical and emotional. I don't even go to financial, but that's so important, right? So I'm curious to hear what other areas you talk about wellness.
Yeah, I would say core areas are physical, social, so our social environment, right? Emotional, which I use to refer more to our inner sense of well being, relational, how are our relationships with family and friends, financial, and then leisure.
Okay. I know you said that we're mostly generally taking care of ourselves, but maybe not in the most important area, or we're focusing on maybe what's being neglected. So what do you think is the areas that are neglected, and what do you think is the most important one?
Yeah. What I think is important is that as parents, we figure out what's important, right? So I've been through a couple major life transitions myself in the last few years. And the therapist that I see asks me, what do you want to be doing with your time? And it's a really simple but telling question. And some people want to be out there volunteering because they want that social interaction. They want those relationships. Some people want to be going to the gym every day because they want that physical well-being. Other people want to work on their finances and make more money. And so I don't know that any of us, whether you're a mental health professional or not, can be prescriptive about that. I do think it's really worth sitting down and doing some kind of self-assessment. And we do this in coaching quite frequently. Take a look at the 6 or 8 areas of life and rank your satisfaction in each of those areas. And then determine, okay, where do I want to put my energy? And one of the things that was helpful to me about my own therapist asking me this question was, I realized I really like to work. Work alleviates a lot of my stress. And so while that might be counterintuitive to other people's ideas of wellness. Oh, are you a workaholic? Are you not getting out and seeing people? Are you not having enough time for yourself? What I really was able to reflect on was that work is creative to me, work is rewarding to me, work is a happy space for me. And so having that time to reflect on it and what makes me feel good is really what I would advocate for everyone. And then put your attention and focus in the space that brings you greater satisfaction. I mean, we all have to pay some attention to all the core areas, right? But when it comes to prioritizing what's going to help us feel best on a day-to-day basis, I think it's really figuring out for yourself what's most important. Some people don't feel well unless all of their relationships and their social plans are in order. Maybe they're extroverted, right? Maybe they just need a lot of that kind of social energy. My son, I would say, is like that. Others of us, we could socialize once a month and be fine, right? Some people have really big financial dreams. Other people are a little bit more content, with a simpler life. So I really think it's about taking the time to reflect on the core areas of life and figure out, where do you want things to be different?
Yeah. And I'm so impressed by your therapist, and not just your therapist, because your therapist can tell you, but you reflecting on the fact that you enjoy work, right? That is so important, because sure, a lot of the times being a workaholic is a thing, but then also there are people who enjoy the work that they're doing, and there's a reason why they're doing it. It's kind of like, how your plan wasn't to end up where you ended up, right? But you did because you were interested in it, and it was what you were drawn to, and it does make you happy. We also get lost, I feel like, in the fact that people talking about, wellness, you're always working, and just that you're not doing this and you never come out. And so you start thinking, oh, I'm not taking care of myself. But it could just be that is what brings you joy, and that is you taking care of yourself. So
Right.
that's such a great way to think about it, and just to remind ourselves of that. So when I'm seeing kids, you can't see kids without the families. That's why I call myself a family psychiatrist. So where does this wellness conversation, what role does it play when you're just seeing the child, even in your coaching? How do you bring that conversation about how parents are taking care of themselves and how that's playing a role in even the child's life, right? How parents are their own wellness,
Yeah.
what examples they're setting, and how happy they are, or how satisfied they are. So I would love to hear about that.
Well, this is an interesting question you're asking, because when families first come to Russell Coaching and they're looking for help for their student who has ADHD or autism, let's kind of simplify it down to that. Often the families who come to me are families who have not been able to find the resources, the services, and the success that they really want for their child. And often when parents come, they are stressed out. They feel they're at the end of their rope. They feel they've been to every doctor in town. They have tried every school in town. And, coaching has a lot of different reputations. And I think there are not a lot of people who are in the space that I'm in talking about evidence-based, science-based academic coaching for kids who have ADHD or autism. So parents are often really surprised that services like ours exist. But at my practice, we actually start every coaching relationship with an intake with just the parents. And the reason for that is I feel like it's so important for parents to be heard. When you are the parent of a child with special needs, and that can be a very broad, encompassing category, but in my case, it's parents who have kids with ADHD or autism, or frequently both, there is a lot that goes on for you emotionally. There are a lot of psychological consequences of that can include loneliness, poor self-esteem. And so I start our process with an intake that's just about listening to the parent's story, and then we get to the child's story. And what's nice is the child doesn't have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can really hear the parent. But almost every time I do an intake, one or the other or both of the parents are in tears because there's so much bottled up emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we talk today, we can talk about what are the things that parents do feel like they have a hard time talking about, or that aren't really in the parent conversation. So for me, we start at Russell Coaching with that parent conversation, and then we provide support to the parents throughout the coaching process. Because just as you're saying, it is completely a family dynamic, right? Especially for kids who are on the spectrum, kids with ADHD, kids who have learning disabilities. And so we're in very close contact with the parents. And I think that is one of the things also that differentiates our coaching practice from a lot of other coaches, because we're really dialed into what is that family relationship like. And I'm really proud of this. 85% of our parents say that their family stress decreases within a month of starting Russell Coaching.
That's amazing. Yeah. So coming back to parent wellness, so how is that conversation then brought up? Like how, when we're having, even in general, outside of our practices, family health comes up and parents talk to each other and this stuff comes up, but not really about their wellness, right? So what's missing? Why aren't they being brought up, these conversations?
Yeah. When we take a look at developmentally what happens, there is a shift when a baby is coming into a family. If baby's coming through a pregnancy, during that time, the pregnancy, there is still a lot of focus on the mom, on the parents, right? And then there's this very abrupt shift when the baby comes. How's the baby? How's the baby? How's the baby? How's the baby? And so in that moment of a couple becoming a family with a child, I think the focus shifts so dramatically. And the rest of parenthood is spent as a parent trying to figure out how much of myself can I bring back into existence while still nurturing and parenting this child? And of course, when they're babies, so much attention is on the babies. And then they become toddlers and we're so stinking proud of them. And they're adorable and they're in preschool. And for many, many families, that's a happy time and it's an exciting time. And their babies are walking and talking and starting to read and doing all kinds of creative things. And it's easy and in some ways beautiful to kind of lose yourself in that parenting experience. And then, as the child starts elementary school, there's some space in there for parents to get back in touch with who they are, what they want, what their individual needs are. And then middle school brings more of that. And high school brings even more of that. But also in our culture, with this incredibly high stress achievement culture that we've created for teenagers, it's again a period of the parent losing themselves. My kid has to get through high school. My kid has to get this kind of GPA. My kid has to get into this kind of college. And so, in contrast with 30 or 40 years ago, when I was a teenager and we all kind of handled our own college selection process, it's not like that anymore. And so parents get drawn back in and their selves get, diminished as they're trying to help their teenager get launched into the world. And of course, a lot of that is natural, right? As parents, we want to see our kids succeed. We love our kids more than we love ourselves sometimes, right? But it is really challenging to bring yourself back into your own focus and into focus in the family. What does mom want? What does dad want? What does mom need? What does dad need when you're surrounded by kids and the natural tendency is to focus on what the kids want and need?
Yeah, going through all these phases is they're not realizing until I guess kids are giving them more space, right? Then they're like, oh, what do I do with my time, right? So how can we have this conversation with parents to remember who they are, to keep their individuality from the beginning, right? How can we have these conversations? How can we make it easier for them?
Yeah. I think one of the points is that wellness and well-being is not about doing things for yourself or buying things for yourself or experiences, right? I think that we have, if you will, commodified wellness, right? You want to feel better, go and have a massage. You want to feel better, go shopping. I think that we could simplify the conversation about wellness down to what am I feeling? What do I need? What is going on in my life that I could simplify, right? But we have in American culture really commodified wellness as something you can purchase, And I think that true wellness, we have to stop that and really think about our own selves as individuals. What do we need? And carve that space out for ourselves. What is it that someone needs in order to feel well, to feel content, to feel happy? I know that when my babies were little, I would stop almost every day on the way to work and get a Starbucks. And quite honestly, for a while, I was like, why do you need a Starbucks every morning? And then I realized I needed transition time from what was often a chaotic morning, right? And then you're getting them off to preschool and there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of chaos and who forgot what. It wasn't so much that I needed to buy a Starbucks. It was that I needed a ritual and kind of to take a beat before I showed up at the office as my best self. And when I realized that it wasn't the Starbucks, it was the transition time that I needed, that was a big insight for me. And I think it's even more relevant. I mean, this would have been, 10, 13 years ago. I think it's even more relevant these days because we are so overwhelmed with time pressure and stimuli.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's too much.
It's so much, right? And I'm so glad that you said ritual because the power of rituals is so overlooked, right? I talk about this all the time that when patients are coming to see me, just the fact that they're calling to make that appointment and coming in, sitting in the waiting room, and then coming to see me, and then I write a prescription or whatever I tell them to do, and them taking, like, that entire thing is a ritual, and there's power in just that, right? Forget the medicine, right? At that point, I might be telling them, hey, go take a yoga class, that's my prescription. And it works because it's the whole ritual of it, right? You went to the doctor, you told them. And they're so important, but we're not looking at those little things. We're just so focused on, I don't know, Instagram destinations. Like that's the first thing that comes to my mind when I'm thinking, oh, people think wellness is traveling, but is it?
What I love about what you're saying and the importance of ritual is, in my mind, ritual creates connection, right? And ritual creates connection to our own selves, our very own individual selves, to others, and to the environment and space around us. And when we have those rituals, they're comforting and they bring us into connection. So much of our time is spent just absorbing and reverberating from the stimuli around us. And rituals help us to block out all of those external noises, sounds, demands, and connect with ourselves. And so I too, like you, am a huge proponent of ritual in our lives.
Yeah. What do you think parents' challenges, especially when their kids are young, right? Talking to others about what's going on with them, and who can they turn to with that?
Yeah. There's a very clear-cut progression when you first have the baby, when people first become parents. Everything is fair game, right? You're talking about, what does the poop in the diaper look like?
Yep.
You're talking about, if someone is breastfeeding, how sore their nipples are. I mean, everything is fair game. And then as the baby becomes a child, we start to close off some of those things, right? There's a little bit more privacy. There's a little bit more pride, I think, that comes into play. And there's a little bit less honest, authentic sharing, right? And when our kids start elementary school, that cycle of high achievement starts, right? Who's got the perfect attendance award this month? Who's got the character award this month? Who won the game in elementary school? And so once that shifts from community of parenting to achievement culture, that I think shuts down a lot of our authentic, real connection. And so it shuts down, I think, our comfort with sharing just daily stressors with our kids, because nobody wants to be that person who doesn't have a great kid, right? But it also shuts down the very real challenges that everyone has that go beyond the daily hassles, right? And that might be financial pressures. It might be career pressures. It might be taking care of elderly parents, right? It might be one's own mental health. It might be having a kid who is using drugs or alcohol. It might be a kid whose mental health you can't figure out. But when we move into that space that in American culture is dominated by achievement, starting in elementary school, it takes away a free, open, non-judgmental space to talk about what's concerning you, what's not going well, because there's not a lot of space in American culture for kids who aren't perfect, who aren't adults. And that's where I think we get disconnected from our own selves, because everyone is then trying to have the perfect child, and our stress increases, kids' stress increases, and of course, not good for wellness.
Yeah. So how can parents maintain like regulating their own emotions through this phase, right? It sounds like elementary school is like that marker, right, where it's happening. So what can they do? What steps can they take?
Yeah. Well, you're going to be surprised to hear me say this, because I know that in general we have the same ideas about social media. But there are times when social media can be absolutely just a godsend. And so for parents who are struggling, who want an authentic, safe space, there are parenting groups online. There are facilitated parenting groups. There's parent coaching groups, even some groups on Facebook that parents belong to. And I think that is actually a wonderful use of social media. Because if you take me, for example, I have two kids who are 2E. They are gifted. They also have ADHD. They have autism. How many kids like that are on my block, right? Or how many kids like that are in their class at school? We're in the minority. And so where do I find parents who understand my experience? And I think that this is where social media can play a really valuable role, with the caveat, right, that you don't get sucked into social media and always reading the most dramatic stories or expecting that people are going to have solutions. But if you can find a space that is a safe, supportive space, that is, I think, one of the best things you can do. And there are a lot of parenting groups that are facilitated or subscription based with an expert leading them. And I'm a fan of that because your experience with your child might not be like someone else's. You know, we know this is valuable for parents, for example, who kids receive a cancer diagnosis. We know that it's valuable when people are going through a divorce, right? Finding that safe, confidential, perhaps even anonymous space on social media, I think can be great. I also think that, you know, finding an in-person friend, even just one who is a good listener. And my roommate from college is that person for me. Her kids are nothing like mine. She has 2 kids. I have 2 kids. Hers are nothing like mine. Mine are nothing like hers. But she is a really good listener. And so I open up to her a lot. And so finding that one safe person to talk to in person is such a blessing if you can find that. And then, you know, third, I would say therapy. Find a therapist. Find a therapeutic environment. Find a group. But we do underestimate sometimes how helpful therapy can be for just getting through life, right? We don't have to be in crisis. One of the things that my own therapist, who's amazing and wonderful, as I've already said, told me a few months ago is, she said, we tend to think about when do people need therapy? And she said, I want to turn that upside down. Everyone deserves therapy.
Yeah. I have a therapist friend that says that, and I love it. I was actually saying something on social media earlier today, and I was going to be like, I'm going to steal that and say, you deserve therapy. Like, you know, everyone deserves it. That's very true. So, hello. This podcast is being sponsored by FMP Mental Health Spa and Family Psychiatry. If you need help, please reach out to us via our website or email or call us. We are available in Tampa, Florida in person, as well as via telepsychiatry in the states of Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Virginia, and now Pennsylvania as well. So, you had started talking a little bit about community and the fact that there's all this competition, right, within just, I guess, your immediate community, because there are not going to be very many kids that are like yours in the school setting, right? So what role does the community play, and what responsibility falls on the community to help parents stay sane almost, right, in certain circumstances?
I think this is a big challenge right now for our culture. And quite honestly, I think that we have swung very far in the direction of individuality, right? Now it's my job as a person to take care of my kids, to take care of myself, to financially support myself, right? We have a very individualistic vibe, if you will, going on right now in American culture. And while this would be a topic for a whole other podcast, I think with more and more people making the decision that formal church is not right for them, and more people not opting into organized volunteer organizations in the community, we just really are at a point in our country where there is not a lot of structure to community outside of work. And so this is something that I think is really important for us to be thinking about going forward. How do we replace the community that those kinds of organizations provided before, right? And it's hard. I'm not sure how it's going to happen, right? But I do think that when we frame wellness as something that an individual parent has to take care of for themselves, instead of raising the valuable question that you've raised, what's the role of the community in creating wellness, right? And I think some of it starts with, what are the messages, right? Messages from school. Sure, we're excited if you won the attendance award. We're excited if you won the pizza party. But you know what? There's another side of that could be emphasized equally, which is, we're happy your kid is at our school. We're happy to know you, right? And that, I believe, could be better balanced. I also think that we need to go back to doing more events where childcare is offered, and inclusive childcare, with rates of kids identified as being on the autism spectrum increasing, whether that's because more are getting identified or there are actually more cases. We don't know. Again, topic for another podcast. But we can't limit childcare to, caretakers who are only equipped to handle typical kids. And so I think that's something that's a real need in the community. And then I think more events for extended family. I love when schools do things like Grandparents' Day, or they just make that broader and they say, bring someone you love from your family. It doesn't have to be a grandparent. Grandparents can live far away. But anything that has to do with extended family and friends, when that's a focus at school or in scouting or at dance, I just think it's so valuable, because then the community is supporting the relationships that child needs, which in turn supports the parents.
Yeah. So that's just some valuable insight. I think that those of us that work in mental health realm need to, I guess, speak up more and have more communication with schools, especially because that's where it starts. You're right. The communities are centered around schools. If you have children, your community is centered around the school. And so I think that is such a good point, that we need to have these open conversations with schools to bring more awareness to how they're wording things. It could be the same thing, but worded differently. And so that's really great insight. Thank you for that. All right. I was talking about my wonderful friend and my social media person who has like an almost 1-year-old and is very close to having the second baby, is pregnant, right? She's like, I can't do this right now. And so when they're at that point, right, they're just completely like, I'm barely surviving. What are the few steps that parents can take in that circumstance?
I'm so glad you're asking this, because this is one of the things that I feel most strongly about. And this is what my answer is to you with this, is instead of going somewhere or buying something or having an experience, this is my suggestion. When you're in the shower, when you're driving, whatever it is, turn off the noise, turn off the music, turn off the podcast, and first think about, as a parent, what do you like about your parenting? What do you like about your parenting? I had the most powerful conversation about parenting with, again, my friend Beth, who was my college roommate. We were talking about what other people don't seem to like about our parenting, sometimes extended family. That's a common conversation. And my friend Beth asked me the most insightful question. She said, what do you like about your parenting? What do you like about your parenting? Now, this was 2 years ago. I had been a parent at this point for about 14 years. I had never stopped to think about, what do I do well as a parent? And what do I like? What do I like about my parenting? And so that's my first suggestion, is you don't have to go to Starbucks. You don't have to get a massage, although I'm very pro massage, very pro wellness activities, right? Turn down the noise, turn down the stimuli in your environment, and think about, what are the things you like about your parenting? Now, the next thing is stop and think about, what do you like about your kids? What do you like about your kids? What are your kids' strengths? We do this all the time as an exercise in Russell coaching. When I'm doing parent coaching, all the time. Make a list of your kids' strengths, put 5 pennies on the windowsill, and try to think about those strengths every day. And when you think about them, move the penny, right? Something very concrete, very tangible. Make a list of those strengths. We live in a pressure cooker, and it's not good for us. And slowing down to be in touch with our own thoughts is so important. And thinking about, what are our kids doing well in the pressure cooker that they live in, right? And not from a, my kid is the best kid point of view, but just genuinely acknowledging, who is my kid and what's great about them? And then the third piece of that thought that you're going to have with yourself is, what are the things that are great about my family right now? What are the strengths of my family? What do I like about my family? What do we do well? And again, I think this comes back to being centered, being focused, and really making an effort to push out of your consciousness some of the messages that we get that aren't healthy, that are only about achievement and perfection and moving and going and doing, right? And they're less about sitting and being and understanding and listening. So that is really what I believe about wellness. Stop, quiet yourself, quiet the environment, think about what you like about your parenting, Think about what you like about the kids you're parenting, and think about what you like about your family, and consciously live those things and appreciate them. Gratitude is great.
It's such a simple point, but I don't think even when people are doing the wellness activities where they're supposed to reflect and do this, parents especially are focusing on that. Like it becomes very individualistic almost. Like they're not thinking about as a family what's going on, right? And mostly reflect on things that they're doing wrong, and then they're going to correct and do right rather than what they're doing right and what is going well, right? And so reflecting on that it's such a simple thing. And
What I love about coaching, right? Coaching comes out of positive psychology and a focus on strengths. And there are a lot of mental health practitioners who also have done this, but it is what I love about coaching is that we are working on discovering and developing strengths and not kind of the endless rat race to become better, you know? And business has seen this, right? I mean, there's been a huge push in business in the last 20 or 30 years about strengths-based leadership, you know? So yeah, absolutely. We all need to grow. We all need to learn. I'm the first one to agree with that. But we also need to sit in the space where we are and appreciate peacefully what good things are happening and what good things have happened and what we're grateful for.
yeah, and what are our strengths, right? Because
Mhm.
the whole strength-based leadership, it's very superficial, and I don't know how much, like in theory, it's great. Is it actually practically happening, and are people actually looking at their strengths and reflecting on them, right? In the business realm, but then also as parents, is such a simple thing, like
I'll tell you, it's the first assessment we do in coaching. Is every kid
yeah,
who comes to Russell Coaching does a strengths assessment and a values exercise with us. And that's because we want to help that student see themselves as a whole person. They're not just a student. They're not just a student with good grades or bad grades, with AP classes or, dual enrollment. They are first and foremost a person with strengths and values and hobbies and interests.
yeah, absolutely. I think just going from what we're talking about as values, it came to my mind that as parents are going through these phases with their kids, right? Possibly the values and the strengths are changing as well, right? And recognizing that is hard because parents can often be like, oh, it's so funny. I'm going to go back to Melissa and her husband. They're like, when we were single, like as in didn't have a child. That's what they mean by when we were single. And they'll compare their life from that to now, right? So how can that, be avoided, and how can we raise awareness on that like you're still possibly the same person with a little bit different values, and it's okay to accept that, right? How would you help parents get to that place?
Gosh, that's such a deep question, right? And I think the answer is the same as it is anytime we're trying to understand another person's experience. Listen, listen, listen some more. And then don't be afraid to ask questions. What is that like for you? What are your thoughts about having the second baby? What are you looking forward to? What are you nervous about? We stay in the superficial realm a lot. But what we need for connection is really to be our whole, complete, authentic selves. And so listen and then ask gentle, kind questions, right? And then, here's the other thing. I'm going to say this when we think about how to support parents, listen, ask wise, gentle questions, and then let's get back in the habit of bring something, go to someone's house. Think about how you feel when someone brings you flowers, when someone sends you a fruit basket to the office. We like those things, right? But we've kind of gotten out of that habit in American culture. Take a dinner, take a lunch. I think there is something about showing up when parents are in a stage, a transition stage, and showing up with something tangible that is just so nurturing, And it could be as simple as a homemade dessert or a tub of ice cream or coffee. But there is something about food and a gift that says, I'm really thinking about you. and I want to nurture you beyond just showing up today for an hour visit.
Yeah, yeah, that's just beautiful. So it comes down to like connection and community again, right? And I think that
Always,
that's like, yeah, yeah. And then that's
always.
something that's come up with them. They were saying that there's like a couple that they were hanging out with, and that couple just said that, oh, we don't have kids. So, we gel better with people that don't have kids. But me and my husband don't have kids, but we're there all the time, right? So I don't know why we become like that as a community and what happened and what changed where we're not coming together anymore. But I think there's so much strength in that, right? And just being comfortable to openly share your emotions, right? Because I know you said like therapy, right? When this wasn't a formal profession, right? People were still being able to share their emotions. And I feel like now we've just kind of limited it to, oh, go to your therapist.
Oh, yeah. Good point, right? Like the only space for emotions is at your therapist's office.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Like, yeah.
I think that as a just community, as a society even, right, we need to improve that and just welcome more of like just, comfortable space. And I think that the idea where you said that do inclusive activities and allow childcare and stuff like that, the concept has become so alien that even though when I opened up the mental health spa part of my clinic, we immediately were like, bring your kids, there's a playroom, we'll put them there, we'll have somebody watching them, you do your yoga, you do your sound bath, right? But the concept even for parents has become so alien that nobody took advantage of that.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
so it's kind of fizzled out because there was just no interest or and it's a child psychiatrist's office. Unless your child is aggressive, we are good, right? We'll take
Right.
care of your child.
Yeah.
But it's such an alien concept now with inclusivity and just inclusivity. I'm not even talking about neurodivergence, right? Just kids being included, like the entire family being welcome and included, right? It's either the parent or the kids. It's never them together. So I've been talking about it a lot about when they've just become parents. Let's like move on from like that and elementary to when kids are going away for college. Now parents have this space, right? And they've been parents and nothing else. And now all of a sudden now they have each other also, which is weird because there's nobody else in there. So what about that time? And what kind of support do they need? What's that transition look like?
One of the things that has changed so dramatically in our culture because of smartphones is the connectedness that parents have with their kids who are away at college. And there are pros and cons of this. And you and I could talk for a long time about, smartphones and technology and relationships. And it's an important topic, right? But one of the things that happens is that the parenting years really get prolonged. You can have your son or daughter who's away at college who's still texting you or calling you several times a day. And the connection piece of that can be healthy, right? But the dependency risk could possibly be not so healthy. And I think it also gets a little scary for parents who feel like, now I still have to be accessible all the time because my kid away at college might need me. There's this real push in our culture for parents to be very involved during the college years for young adults who are going to college, which is not everyone's path, right? But you join the Facebook page for the college for the year that your kid is going to graduate, right? You join, the Facebook page for the year that your kid is graduating high school. You join the Facebook page for how to decorate your kid's dorm room. There is as much pressure to be involved when you're sending a kid off to college as there is when you're birthing a baby. I mean, the parallels are striking. And, so I think the question for everyone to be asking there is this healthy connection or is this too much enmeshment, too much dependency? Is the child who's off to college getting the experience of being independent? What would they do if they couldn't call home to say, I don't know what to do now? And I think that is a real need in our culture to pull back some of the independence that kids had at an earlier stage, and that technology facilitates, but can very quickly go too far. Mom, what should I do? What should I wear? What should I wear to rush? What should I wear to the first day of classes? Mom, I overslept for my exam. What should I do?
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to stop by and ask you, how are you really doing? Also, how are we doing? Are you guys enjoying this topic? Please leave us comments about it. And also, if you have any pressing questions, please go ahead and leave those in the comments too. We will find an expert to come and speak about it. Finally, please subscribe to the channel, like our videos, share it with your friends, and follow us on Instagram.
Mom, I overslept for my exam. What should I do? You know what? This is what you should do. Figure it out.
Exactly.
Send me a snapshot, but don't call and ask me what you should do.
Exactly.
I taught at the University of Tampa for the first time in several years this fall. There's a Facebook website it's called Grown and Flown Parents, and can be a wonderful resource. I was in shock with the number of conversations that were being had on that Facebook page about what should I do about my kid failing this class? What should I do about my kid being told they can't take the exam over again? And, I didn't chime in. It's not necessary. But a lot of my response to the situation as it was described in the post was, let your kid figure it out, right? Mm-hmm. But so much time and effort is being spent on what should parents be doing for these young adults or, mid-20s adults. And it's like, we should be doing a lot less.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then the growth and maturity of your child as an individual is being halted by that. Do you think this is more common in private colleges like University of Tampa, or do you think it's going on in every...
I think it's going on with all families who are in the privileged position of being able to afford college these days. If your kid is going to college, you're having these conversations. Probably a little bit different for kids who are at community college, kids who are maybe at the trade schools. But I think whether it's USF, whether it's UF, whether it's, UCLA, whether it's NYU, this is just the culture right now for parents of college kids. It is remarkable how involved you can be in your kid's college experience.
I thought that was just my South Asian culture. Sounds like that's switching. So there's a balance then, right? I feel like there's this part where our society is so individualistic, but then there's this part where maybe because we're so individualistic here, where, families need support when the kid is going away because they were, as an individual family, just so focused on that's continuing, and then we're not letting our kids be individuals. So it's kind of reversing.
Really fascinating. How do we balance the family unit, the individuals, and the community? It's really that kind of, I don't know, it's almost a sociological question more than a psychological question, but it fascinates me because we really are, as a culture right now, very much in an individualistic mode. And when a culture is like that, the downside is that we lose the value of community and connection. And I think that's a lot of what's going on right now. Yeah. Everyone is focused on personal achievement, not collective achievement.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it comes at the expense of our wellness.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I was going to say, right? So just overall as a society, if the society is not healthy, the individual can't be healthy either, right? Even though it seems like it's we're stuck in the survival of the fittest or whatever, but eventually the entire thing would collapse because we're not helping each other and just kind of spreading the calm and all of that. We're just so busy working ourselves, I guess, climbing those stairs, maybe elbowing some people on the way up, which is not what's going to help overall.
Right. I gave this a lot of thought preparing for your podcast. I love the title of it. How are you really? I think there are parents who would say, I'm great. My kid is great. I'm doing great. I love it. Best time of my life. But I think there are a lot of parents who would say, how am I really? I am stressed. I feel isolated. I doubt myself. I'm too often angry at my kid. And I think it comes because our culture has become so fast paced and so individualistic. And so, especially for parents who are raising kids with special needs, for parents who have financial stressors, very common, right? Job transitions. The answer to how are you really when you're a parent is so multifaceted. How is your kid is really the subtext, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then how are you? And then how's the bigger you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how is
Mm-hmm.
your life? And if we would ask each other that on a regular basis, how are you really? I think we would all have a stronger sense of wellness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I'm so glad that you came and spoke about this. I even think that the parents that will say, I'm great, my kid is great. I mean, how did you get to that great? And what does that great mean? Like, are you actually taking care of yourself while being that great, right? Because our answer, like typically if somebody asks you, how are you, is, oh, I'm fine. How are you? Like, that's like the answer, right? I've started pausing right? And I check in anytime somebody asks me, how are you? I check in and I say, I'm okay. Like, if I don't want to overshare, of course you don't want to do that, but I take a pause to check in with myself. And I think that's where the how are you really came, where it was kind of like, we just, as Americans, as a society, we're just like, I'm fine. How are you? Like, there's just no emotion, no sharing. I'm not liking this, or, I'm upset about that, and it's okay, right? There's on very little occasion, somebody will be like, it's raining and I don't like it. And I'm like, thank you for saying that, because it is okay to say that, right? And so it's just people are having a hard time just opening up and saying and basically connecting, right? You're not connecting when you're just drawing this wall of I'm great or I'm okay, I'm fine. So last, I kind of want to grasp from you just any like last minute advice to parents. How can they power up, right? If you had to give like one thing that they can do today, right? What can they do?
Turn down the external environment. Check out from the external environment. Wear headphones when you go to the store. You don't have to listen to the music they're playing, right? When did gas stations start playing music? Sit in the car by yourself. Don't listen to something. I really feel that the constant stimuli from our physical environment disconnects us from ourselves and from our feelings and from having time to process what we're experiencing as human beings. And so, maybe that sounds too, abstract, but I really think that the best thing we could all do for ourselves as parents to increase our wellness is to turn down the outside environment.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. Just kind of come to center and kind of figure out what is going on first, right? Before you can even go to fix it. All right, wonderful. So I have to ask, how are you really doing?
You had to ask, didn't you? That's the title of
Yes.
the podcast. Yeah. There are days that are filled with so much joy, productivity, creativity, and you feel like you're in that flow state, right? And it's wonderful. And then there are days for me that anxiety and insecurity are the dominant feelings of that day. And that doesn't feel so great. And then there are days when politics and finances dominate, and that's also not so great. So how am I really? I think I'm pretty well overall. And because I'm a mom, a huge part of how I am is how my kids are, and my kids are doing well. And I have a puppy, and the puppy does nothing but make you laugh. And so
That's
puppy is a
awesome.
very good intervention on those days when I feel anxious, insecure, worried, or that the world is not so stable. So I have the same feelings everybody has. And I'm very much an intense, emotional feelings person. But overall, I'm good, my friend.
I'm so glad. I am so thankful that you came on. I appreciate you so much, and I appreciate Russell Coaching. I think that there's nothing like it, and it's just an amazing resource for parents. Thank you for creating it. Thank you for taking time out. I know you're busy, but I really appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. It's an honor to be here. And, I think the world of you, and you've been a tremendous help to me with various cases. And so I wish you all the success with this project and the wellness spa.
Thank you so much. All right. So thank you, listeners and audience, for tuning in. Would love it if you guys subscribed. If you have anything pressing, kind of like Parent Power Up or something else, you can put it on the comments and we're going to find somebody to come and talk about it. And take care. We'll see you next Tuesday. Bye.